Welcome to the Global Discussion, a discussion with creatives, leaders, and thinkers. My name is Simon Hodgkins, and today I'm delighted to be joined by Emmet O'Sullivan. Emmet, you're very welcome to the show. Let's begin by asking you to introduce yourself to our audience. So over to you, Emmet.
Thank you so much, Simon. My name is Emmet O'Sullivan, and I'm 17 years old, growing up in New York City. Um, like Simon, I have an Irish background. My parents are Irish. I'm an Irish American. That's how I identify myself. Um, and I'm going into my last year of high school right now. And I guess the reason I'm talking today is talking about sort of my journey with type 1 diabetes and a lot of the things I've done with that, especially writing a book, which I guess we'll get into soon. Um, but yeah,
Yeah, thanks, Emmet. And how's New York City treating you?
New York City is great. Um, I love the access to everything in New York City. Can't really see myself living in a super rural area. I love how the city life treats me. I feel like I'm born and raised a city kid, unlike maybe my parents, but uh,
Very good.
I'm definitely super appreciative of where I live.
Very good. Well, look, from New York City, let's talk a little bit about your life journey so far, because I want to get into, if I can, the type 1 diabetes diagnosis. I'm imagining it changed your life abruptly in an instant. Can you
Mhm.
maybe take us through that if you don't mind, Emmett?
Yeah, so it was 2020. So I was 13 years old at the time, and it was May of 2020. So if you go back a few years and you put yourself in that situation, that's when peak COVID was really, really prevalent. Um, in terms of my symptoms and everything, I was just feeling all for a few months even beforehand, I was feeling super tired. At the time, I was in the end of my seventh grade and I had online school on Zoom, and I could barely keep myself awake during classes. Um, and these were entertaining classes. I just, I just could not keep myself awake. And I was super, super thirsty. Um, I went to the bathroom so often, but these are just like kind of random symptoms I didn't really know what to attribute it to, because no one really knows, like when you ask like a regular person on the street, like what are the symptoms of type 1 diabetes? No one really knows. So during that time, everyone would really attribute like every disease to like COVID. You think any sort of symptoms, oh, that might be some new variant of COVID, or that's some odd symptoms of COVID. And when I sort of voiced my symptoms after they accumulated for just a time where I had to speak up, first spoke to my parents, and I was talking about the symptoms, and my mom was just like, "Oh, Emmett, you probably have COVID." And then I actually did more Googling myself, and I looked into the disease. I looked into like my symptoms, and I diagnosed myself. I said, I have type 1 diabetes. I said this to my parents, and um they're like, "What are you talking about? What even is that?" Because I even though it's a genetic disease, and I'll talk a little about the disease in a second, it's I had no family history at all of it. So eventually I went to the emergency room. They pretty much confirmed my suspicions that I have type 1 diabetes, and spent a few days in the hospital, and it's been an upward journey after that.
Yeah, well, thank you for sharing that. The self-diagnosis is incredible. Thank goodness for Google. I don't, was Chat GPT a thing then? Probably not.
I don't think so, no.
Yeah, yeah. Um, so you mentioned maybe expand a little bit on type 1 diabetes, because some people unfortunately are very familiar with it, and a lot of people listening or watching to this episode around the world maybe not so familiar. So what were the top challenges? What did you encounter with the condition? Could you maybe expand on it a little bit in terms of, that understanding for people who aren't as familiar with type 1 diabetes as some people?
Yeah, and it's a good point you bring up, because a lot of people more and more every year are being diagnosed with type 1 diabetes and diabetes in general. And even COVID itself, COVID as a trigger for type 1 diabetes, they saw a spike in the numbers. So they're not really sure how they can, or those like how those cause, or how did COVID cause type 1 diabetes, but they saw that as evidence for the numbers for evidence of that sort of causing more diabetes. But in terms of a brief overview a very boiled down like version of what the disease is when your pancreas, which is an organ in your body, basically stops producing insulin. That's type 1 diabetes, and the insulin you might have a little bit left doesn't work as well. It just stops producing that hormone insulin, which is meant to break down the sugar in your body. So if I drink a glass of orange juice and my basically your insulin should go throughout your bloodstream and break down those sugars so you can digest everything. What would happen with me is since I don't produce insulin, the sugars would just be in my blood. My blood sugar level would raise. My blood wouldn't be as effective. My organs wouldn't function as well. Um, so that's like type 1 diabetes, which is chronic. So basically, I have it for the rest of my life unless there's a development for a cure, which is, I guess, on the way. There's hopeful for a cure in my lifetime. And that's how, in terms of how to manage it, it's just administering insulin. So I give myself like insulin injections multiple times a day. I used to be pretty afraid of needles, but obviously I had to overcome that, I guess. Um, and there's a lot of different technology to manage it. You can prick your finger and see your blood sugar levels with like a little drop of blood. Care about the carbohydrates you're putting into your body. So it's a lot of nutrition based, but it's definitely not the only thing. I have to care a lot about my activity. If I'm very active, my blood sugar levels will drop. So it's important to have a snack with you. So these are just some random, I guess, things I have to go through with diabetes. But then there's also type 2 diabetes, and there's also more niche types of diabetes. So type 1 is about, I think, 5% of all cases of diabetes in America. So type 2 is much more common, and that's more of a lifestyle condition. You can be definitely genetically predisposed to it, but it's reversible in the way that you can, if you can change your diet more, and it's not genetic. If you change your diet and lifestyle habits, you can reverse it. And it's not always, sometimes there's oral medication for it. And that's pretty much when your pancreas still produces insulin, but it's your body's insulin resistant. So the insulin doesn't really work as well. So if you think about the sugars going through the bloodstreams, you have that hormone pumping through it, but it's not really bringing the levels down as well. So that's a different type of the disease I have, and the much more common type. So that was just a little bit of a science lesson on what actual diabetes was.
And Emmet, thank you for sharing that and giving us the differences of type 1, type 2, and of course there are other variances or niches within that. But obviously you mentioned, maybe a cure in your lifetime, and there's, artificial intelligence is now here, and we are making some leaps and bounds being able to use these large language models and having AI help the wider life sciences community. And maybe we're at the beginning of that journey. But also in digital health, we're seeing lots of new devices come out where people can track this maybe a little bit better than we could in the past. Do you come up against many misconceptions or myths when you talk to maybe your family or friends or strangers even, or people in New York City that you're talking to about type 1 diabetes? Is there many misconceptions or misunderstandings about it?
So the definitely a lot of people don't first of all know the difference between the different types of diabetes and kind of categorize it as one, which I understand. I don't think there's enough education about it. Before I was diagnosed, I might even do the same thing. So one thing I often hear is, how do you have diabetes? You're so thin. Because a lot of people attribute having diabetes to being overweight, which is not always the case. Actually, with type 1 diabetes, when I was diagnosed, I was super, super thin, and I had like lost like 10 pounds in like a month or something crazy, and I didn't even notice. Um, so that's definitely when I hear a lot of times people will say like, "Oh, are you sure you can eat that?" or something like that when I'm about to eat, I guess like somewhat of a sugary food. Because with type 1 diabetes, you can pretty much eat anything if you give yourself enough insulin for it. So if my milkshake has 80 carbohydrates, I have to give myself however many units correspond with that. Um, so that's something I hear a lot. I think people doubting that you can still be active and still play sports. I love playing basketball with my friends all the time, and I don't let type 1 diabetes at all stop me from doing that because I love doing it. I have a great time with my friends doing it. So just a general misconception that you can't really do anything else that anyone else can do, and it's gonna impede your active life somehow, in your life nutritionally, while you do have to definitely pay a lot more attention to what you're doing, have a lot more self-control, responsibility with your body and your intake and what you're doing. You can still, I guess, like be like anyone else and do anything else that other people are doing. So I think just a general misconception is that you're held back from a lot of these things.
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks for sharing some of those misconceptions. I'm really glad to hear you're still on the court, though. So that's great. That's
Gotta
great
stay
to
on
hear.
the court. Yeah.
Alrighty. Now, look, not only have you been dealing with this challenge and coming to terms with that and adapting your lifestyle accordingly, but you've taken some real proactive action here, and you've been writing a book, or you've published a book, I should say. It's a bestseller at this stage to help others too. Now, tell us the background to it. Tell us what made you decide that you were going to get into this, and then expand on it and tell us about the book because I think it's fascinating.
Hmm. So a really just to go back quickly on my diagnosis, because I think it's really relevant to like like why I decided to write the book. So when I was diagnosed, the regular blood sugar level for, I guess, like a healthy human is around 70 to 120 um like milligrams per deciliter of sugar in your bloodstream. Like that's like the measurement they use. So it's 70 to 120. When I was diagnosed, I was at 596. So I was off the charts with the range. And that level, once you get around that 600 mark, that's when it becomes lethal. You can really die off that. And I was really close to unfortunately dying. Um, and they told me that after I was being diagnosed, it's you're so lucky you caught it in time. If you caught it any later, we would have had a lot of trouble on our hands. So what that lesson is this disease is getting caught super late. And because people just don't know the symptoms. When I was feeling so tired, I didn't attribute it at all to type 1 diabetes. That's not something, I guess, it's not a rational response, really. I got lucky in the fact that I Googled it. Somehow I clicked on enough links to find that. And I had the confidence, I guess, to say to my mom, I think I have this disease. But no one really knows the symptoms. So a big problem I saw was people being diagnosed super late and no one knowing the symptoms. No one knows the signs of type 1 diabetes. And with an increasing disease, that's really important that we start learning the signs and being educated on what actually the disease is like. So I think what I was thinking with the book, so writing Drew Discovers Diabetes, which is the name of the book, I wanted to, the number one goal was to spread the signs of type 1 diabetes. So it's not necessarily for just kids with diabetes, it's for really all families to have a children's book that explains to them what the symptoms are so they can, if they see someone else experiencing the symptoms, they can refer them, inform them they might have type 1 diabetes if they see a family member, if they see themselves. So the number one thing is really spreading the signs of diabetes because I don't want anyone else to catch it as late as I did because that's really, really dangerous. Um, and also in terms of like the policy right now in the status quo, they're pushing a lot more for type 1 diabetes screening. Like even in like Italy in the last like year, they're pushing for a lot of like screening with newborns and they're screening people more and more to catch this disease. So it's adjusting with the numbers of growth in the disease. They are making changes, but I identify a big problem with the education. So I think that was the number one goal of the book. So, and then I think the second goal would be empowering kids with type 1 diabetes, kind of what I was talking about earlier, informing them that they can do anything. In the book, Drew's a dinosaur. He's having super similar symptoms to me. It's kind of, in a way, it kind of mirrors my diagnosis. And Drew loves to play Leafy Chase with his dino buddies. And after he's feeling super, super tired, he's starting to eat snacks because he thinks eating snacks is going to help him feel tired, but in truth, that's actually the opposite because a lot of the fruits and sugar snacks he's eating actually make him feel worse. But in the end, he struggles a lot with the disease, gets diagnosed, but he ends up with the support of a great community, realizing he can do anything he sets his mind to, like any other dinosaur. So, yeah. So I mean, in terms of the book, I wanted to really spread the signs of diabetes and empower kids with type 1 diabetes so they can do anything. And all the while, I'd really also just always wanted to write like a children's book. And I think I never really had anything super meaningful to write about until I sort of came across this obstacle in my life. And it gave me inspiration.
Yeah, it's wonderful. And it became a bestseller on Amazon, right?
Mm.
So this isn't just something that a few people have read, like it's got traction. And was that a surprise to you? Were you excited to see that? Because, you are really doing what you set out to do. You're spreading the news, you're talking about diagnosing it early, and you're getting that message out there. Was that good to see?
So that was great to see because so the story behind the bestseller is basically it was on American Diabetes Alert Day 2024. So that was about end of March, soon after I'd published it. And that was a day where I got a lot of traction because that's a big day in the type 1 diabetes world. So what I did is I talked to a lot of diabetes nonprofits and organizations. They helped me by pushing my book out in their newsletters and sending it out to their newly diagnosed patients, and outreach to their family and or to my family and friends, um, and old teachers and stuff like that from school. So I definitely put a lot of effort to make sure my book didn't just like sit on the Amazon page without people buying, and I wanted people to buy. I wanted to spread. And not necessarily the goal was to hit like the bestseller mark. So in terms of how it worked is I hit number one bestseller on that day for multiple categories. I think it was like diseases and physical illnesses, how things workbook, which is like an explanatory category. And I think I hit number two on children's ebooks, like all of children's ebooks, which I'm pretty proud of as well. Because the book was released also in the ebook form because I could put that price as cheap as possible. And this gets to a lot of the Amazon technicalities, which is a super confusing platform with self-publishing, but um, I could minimize the price to like $1.99, which I think was like a euro 70. And that's in that way I could get as many people who wanted the book to buy it and not have price to be such a restriction, because the paperback I could only reduce to like around $8. So that was also part of the a lot of the decision making with pricing and stuff like that. But yeah.
And I have to ask, and I'm sure you've been asked it before, but how come it's Drew discovering diabetes and not Emmet? What's the story behind that?
Yeah, so I mean, while it definitely does in a way mirror my diagnosis, everyone's being diagnosed in different ways. But it's similar to mine in terms of, especially in terms of the specific symptoms and the sort of chronology of like approaching your parents and stuff. But I decided to name it Drew because I didn't want the book to just be about like my story. I wanted really it to be about anyone with diabetes. So the first answer would be I wanted anyone to be able to see themselves with it, especially with Drew being more of a gender neutral name than Emmett, especially with a book about dinosaurs, which I know would like naturally skew pretty masculine. I wanted to have the name not be as like a masculine name, not be so associated with, I guess, like a boy name. So I want, because so any gender could read the book. Um, and then another big reason is just naturally, if it was Emmett discovers diabetes, okay, but Drew discovers diabetes, I think rolls off the tongue with the alliteration. It's gonna be catchy when you see that name on the Amazon page. It's easier to say. So that's a more practical reason for naming it that. But yeah, those two reasons are mainly why I didn't name it Emmett discovers diabetes.
Very good, very good. And I know you've been obviously reflecting on your journey. You've been thinking about your own situation, um, and that's turned into some reflections around things like gratitude, which sounds strange initially when you say it, but that acceptance and that gratitude. And has that come because you've been able to spread the word, because you've been able to, we talk with creatives, leaders, and thinkers here, and you're sort of leading a charge in that way, using a creative vehicle to do that. But can we talk a little bit about acceptance and gratitude? Because not really two words that you would associate with being diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. So could you unpack that a little bit for us, Emmett?
Definitely. So I would first say when I was diagnosed right away, it was super challenging. I didn't know no one in my family had type 1 diabetes. I didn't know anyone my age with it. No one in school had it. I really didn't know anyone with it at all. So when I guess exited the hospital after a couple of days, they gave me the tools, and I had Google on my side whenever like things went wrong. I could definitely Google things, but like I had to be super, super independent from the beginning. And at 13 years old, I was an independent kid already, but that level of management was a whole new level I hadn't experienced before. So an interesting, I guess, number I think is people with type 1 diabetes, they've measured it. They make around 180 to up to 320 extra decisions every single day than, I guess, a non-diabetic or I guess like a normal person without the type 1 diabetes. So what I'm grateful for that is because it's made me a lot more responsible, definitely a much better decision maker. I mean, for example, in school, I'm a part of the debate team, and in debate, I have to make a lot of decisions, and I think those 180 extra decisions every day, they accumulate to make me a better decision maker in big important moments. So yeah, so generally decision making and responsibility, and also just like overall control of my health and thinking what I'm putting into my body, thinking about my nutrition as well. I think I've become actually a lot healthier after my diagnosis, caring about the foods I'm eating. But mainly it's just that responsibility. I think I've grown a lot as when I was a sort of a 13-year-old who felt alone, and after having to push through this independently, I've been much more confident. I think it's developed me as like a leader and making decisions. So that's what I would probably attribute my gratitude towards.
Yeah, thank you for giving us that inside thought process there. I really appreciate it. In terms of the community, because obviously you're involved in the community, you're building a community too, and you're sharing this message. And we think about things like your own goals in life. You said earlier as we were talking that you'd always wanted to write a children's book. And do you have that spark of the entrepreneurial mindset? What's on your roadmap? What are you thinking about for the future? And what impact are you hoping to have here, Emmett?
Definitely. So I would say the book was not at all like an end goal. I was not going into thinking I'm going to write this book and it's going to do great and I'm going to live my life. The book really served as like a platform and a stepping stone into the type 1 diabetes community for me to be really an advocate and a voice for the community. So especially after hitting bestseller, it gave me sort of the credentials to be able to get more involved. So after the book published, I spoke at a lot of fundraisers for the Diabetes Research Institute, telling my journey. They used to have a lot of speeches from like the researchers and the leaders of the company, but they never really had speeches from people with type 1 diabetes themselves. And they actually found that when I spoke about my journey, they saw a lot more people with donations for a cure. So it's really important to hear someone with the disease actually talk about their experience, especially at like these galas and fundraisers and stuff. So I've done a lot of work with that. Um, let's see. In terms of the book spreading, the book is in a lot of schools across America, in libraries and in hospitals. Um, I received a note from a dad recently saying he's really appreciative of the book. He used it to explain to his kid his type 1 diabetes. So the dad had type 1 diabetes, but he used the book to explain it to his kid. So that was a cool anecdote. And even like moments like that make me proud I've written the book. Um, and then I've spoken at some like college classes about like a marketing class about how to sort of hit bestseller in your book, talking about my journey there, a public policy sort of class at like NYU. So it's a lot of speaking engagements and stuff. One thing I'd say like above that, what I found really important, I remember, or like just now I was talking about how I felt when I was just diagnosed, super alone in the process, and was definitely struggling, had to be super independent. But one thing I did was start this teen support group in New York. And just like last week, we had a big meetup in Central Park of a bunch of different teens that are teens with diabetes. Some of them were newly diagnosed, and I had a good time organizing that and meeting a lot of kids with type 1 diabetes. So like I remember my old self when I was 13 years old, not knowing anyone with diabetes. Now we have a whole group chat and a whole support system, not doctors with lab coats that are trying to relate to us. And so we can kind of just talk to each other if we ever have some late night concerns or anything. Um, yeah, so I mean, those are some of the things I've been caring a lot about the community work. In terms of when I get older, I think I'm going to be much more interested in like the policy of type 1 diabetes because that's how I think I can make real lasting change. And I'm definitely an advocate for a lot of the type 1 diabetes bills in Congress. They're like even the presidential debates and stuff. There's a lot of talk about insulin caps, so like $35 caps for elders in America. And there's a lot of policy for screening type 1 diabetes and making it much more accessible. So I think going forward, starting to care a lot more about that, while I still value a lot of the community work I'm doing. So that's kind of a goal I have, but staying involved in the type 1 diabetes community, definitely feel super passionate about.
That's wonderful to hear. Thank you. And some great work that you're doing there too, really helping and supporting people. That's a wonderful thing to be involved in. Before we run out of time, Emmett, if people want to connect with you or they want to get their hands on the book, whether it's the physical book or the ebook, where's the best place to point people to at the end of our discussion here today?
Yeah, I think the number one thing you can do, I mean, if you want to buy the book, that would be great on Amazon. Drew Discovers Diabetes on Amazon, or if you speak Spanish, Drew Descubre la Diabetes on Amazon. If you want the Spanish translation, that would be great. So, I mean, there's the ebook available, the paperback available. But I think the number one thing, if you don't want to buy the book, that's okay. I think the number one thing is just learn about the symptoms of diabetes, tell people about the symptoms of diabetes, of type 1 diabetes. So that's really the lesson from today, I guess, would be more educated about this disease, because someone you know might have it and you don't even know. A lot of people right now are not even diagnosed and they have it, or being misdiagnosed. So the number one thing is learn about the disease more, but it would be great if you could buy the book as well on Amazon.
Well, that's great. And it brings us nicely to the end of our time here today, Emmett. It's been a real pleasure to spend time with you. Thank you so much indeed for sharing your own personal story and journey. And it's wonderful, genuinely wonderful to hear all the good news and impact that you're having already. And long may that continue. So I want to thank everybody who's watching or listening to this episode around the world. Make sure that you follow, like, subscribe, do everything I need you to do to help support the show. Go and get Emmett's book immediately. That's really, really important. Check out all the things he's doing and keep an eye on him. I think you'll be hearing more from Emmett in the future. But I would like to invite people to come back and join me here for some more discussions with creatives and leaders and thinkers just like Emmett. Thank you, Emmett. It's been a real pleasure to have you on the show today, sir.
Thank you. It's been an honor to be here.